So my last video about Earthion and limited run games got a lot of views, and it seems like it struck a chord with many viewers because of the frustrations out there with limited run games and how this situation is being handled. That being said, some of you still bought Earthion to support Yuzo Koshiro, even though you don't like limited run games, and I do respect that. It's not the easiest decision in the world, so I don't fault fans of Koshiro for holding their noses and buying the game on Steam. That being said, I made my stance very clear. I'm not buying Earthion, and I'm not buying any digital release from limited run games until they stop using DRM tactics such as encryption on ROMs, whether it be on Steam or anywhere else. Earthion had encryption in it even though it got hacked quickly, and so do other releases by limited run games since they flip-flopped and embraced this business practice late last year. So I'm going to take the time now to explain my position further to those of you that are new to the channel, or you've only seen my Earthion video. This company is more than worthy of a boycott over this, and it's not just an Earthion problem. So first of all, let's start off with DRM in general, because DRM in and of itself is pretty bad. DRM is obviously bad because it treats paying customers as if they are potential criminals. Whenever implemented, it usually ends up making it more inconvenient to use a particular product. Want to convert something over to a more commonly used file format? DRM doesn't like that. You want to make backups of a new game that you just purchased and downloaded? DRM might have a problem with that as well. And in certain cases, like with De Novo, it even makes games perform worse than they would otherwise. A lot of developers that use De Novo end up removing it after a certain point, and sometimes there's a noticeable performance boost just from that alone. The worst thing of all is, it almost never stops piracy, at least not in the long term. Pirates always seem to find a way to crack it or get around it. So basically, customers are screwed, while the pirates are going to do whatever they want regardless. The sad thing is, DRM is almost impossible to escape entirely in our daily lives. It's in so many devices and services that we use nowadays, it's kind of absurd. Honestly, some of it isn't as pervasive and annoying as other forms of it, so people are more tolerant of it in some cases. Sometimes it just comes down to personal preference in terms of what you're willing to tolerate, and sometimes you just don't have any other legitimate options outside of piracy. But some instances of it are just so obvious and annoying that you don't want to deal with it. And that's where I've gotten with certain DRM out there. I don't use a lot of music plugins anymore, for example, because of how annoying DRM like iLok is, as well as the simple fact that I'm on Linux for making music nowadays. That's where I am with DRM in some games as well, especially when it comes to DRM on ROMs. I can tolerate being required to sign into Steam, especially when the game I want to play isn't on good old games. But putting DRM on ROMs on Steam is a bit insulting to my intelligence and incredibly inconvenient, because otherwise I'd be able to take the ROM and put it in my favorite emulator on my Mister. Now that's not to say that I have not bought emulation-based releases in the past on Steam. I have. But some of those had cool extras like maybe an arranged soundtrack, or some companies like M2 provide a lot of extras, as well as excellent performance that competes with the best emulators. Realistically, we have to pick and choose our fights on DRM to some extent. We shouldn't accept every piece of DRM that gets shoved down our throats, obviously. But it's really hard to ditch it all overnight, if not almost impossible. I understand that. While you can't boycott everything at one time, you can certainly boycott the worst offenders out there, which leads me to limited run games. I know a lot of you will point out that DRM is everywhere in modern gaming, and you'd be correct. Just about all of the big AAA publishers use it, some more egregious than others. Even small publishers use it, consoles use it as well. But the thing is, limited run games is supposed to be an alternative to modern digital gaming as we know it. The reason the founders started the company was to make digital games into physical games that you could own, because they wanted to own their own games. People from the company have also mentioned in the past that if a digital game gets pulled from storefronts, it's gone forever, while physical releases are much better for preservation purposes. They're right, that makes perfect sense to me. So here is the problem. DRM means you own nothing and that you have no rights over the games you purchase. DRM is precisely the reason why digital games are much harder to preserve legally, in large part thanks to terrible laws like Section 1201 of the DMCA, which I'll be making a separate video about in the future. Keep in mind that many of the most die-hard supporters of limited run games buy from them because they want to own their own games, and they don't really like digital gaming a whole lot. By embracing DRM, which they have through encryption, limited run games is embracing the same elements that make digital gaming as restrictive as it is nowadays, which is a slap in the face to anyone who has ever supported this company. It's complete hypocrisy at its worst, and to me it destroys their brand as much as any of their other controversies in recent times. Imagine if Snoop Dogg ratted out one of his own friends to the cops for lighting up a joint back in the day. Or imagine a straight edge person telling you not to drink, only to then go to a bar and get wasted. Or even better example, imagine if a politician campaigned on family values, only to later that night cheat on his wife. That's the level of hypocrisy we're dealing with here, and this is actually real. They are clearly not your friend in this digital era, a wolf in sheep's clothing if there ever was one. If anything, they probably want the status quo around digital games to stay the same in order for people to feel like they have to buy their limited edition physical releases as an alternative. And yes, I'm aware that the digital releases they do are just a sideshow for them. They make a little bit of extra money off of those, but they're not the main focus. But regardless, hypocrisy is hypocrisy at the end of the day. But what makes this hypocrisy worse is that it wasn't always like this for limited run games. In the past, there were releases on Steam where they included unencrypted ROMs. Two examples I brought up in previous videos were the Jurassic Park and Rocket Knight Adventures collections on Steam. In fact, I bought the Jurassic Park one a while back precisely because it came with the ROMs. They did the right thing back then, only to flip-flop and embrace DRM. Clock Tower late last year seemed to be the re-release that started this trend, and it continued on with Ninja 5.0 this year as well as Rendering Ranger R2. Even the good old games releases aren't safe from this. This is an obvious flip-flop if there ever was one, with no real explanation from the company either. This was done quietly, hoping most gamers wouldn't notice or care, but then Earthion came out and gamers noticed it this time around, especially when they noticed how quickly the ROM got cracked. They deserve all the criticism they're getting over Earthion's ROM getting out there in the wild and then some. I learned the hard way about this flip-flop when I got Rendering Ranger R2 off of Good Old Games, thinking that I was going to be able to grab the ROMs just like I did with Jurassic Park. But nope, I got an archive with the ROMs that I was able to open up, but they were password protected. And as I said in my first video about the company, the way they dangled the ROMs in my face with that archive that I could open but couldn't extract made it even more insulting, so I ended up grabbing my refund pretty quickly. And yes, I know that the passwords for those archives are out there, but they should have never done this in the first place. The only exception to this policy that I could find recently from the company is their Gex Trilogy collection on Steam, which came out in June. It does seem to have the ISO files unprotected from what I could gather. You just need to change the file extensions to .bin and maybe make your own .q files as well, and then you can run them in another emulator like DuckStation. That being said, all of these collections should have the files unencrypted, not just this one. This used to be the standard for them. Now it appears to be the exception instead, which means that my overall point still stands. It's one thing to be a bad company with bad practices, but the hypocrisy and the flip-flop make it so much worse in this situation, and because of that, I don't think you should support their digital releases, let alone their physical ones. Don't support them at all. They might not be the only ones embracing DRM, but they are among the most hypocritical, and I believe we should make an example out of them in the marketplace for that very reason. I know the digital releases are not the main focal point of the company, but the hypocrisy of claiming to be for preservation of games and people owning their own games, yet embracing DRM, proves to me that they are one of the worst companies in all of gaming today. And that's not even getting into their recent controversies involving certain physical releases. I might even go as far as to say that they are just controlled opposition for the AAA gaming industry, considering they're now owned by the Embracer Group. But anyways, that's why I didn't buy Earthion, and I won't be buying anything else from limited run games on Steam or Good Old Games for the time being, let alone their physical releases. Let me know what you think in the comments though, whether you agree with me or disagree with me. Also, I wish Modern Vintage Gamer or someone else from the company would address this, but I highly doubt that that will ever happen, and I have a feeling that even if they did, they would just double down instead of changing their ways. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.